On the humid morning of May 23, 1918, a chilling discovery in the back room of a New Orleans grocery store inaugurated one of the most baffling periods of terror in American history. During the 1918 to 1919 reign of a phantom intruder, the city was paralyzed by fear as a shadow slipped through locked doors, leaving behind scenes of unspeakable brutality. This was not a crime of passion or a robbery gone wrong, but the deliberate work of an assailant who would soon command the city's nightlife with a bizarre decree. How does a perpetrator repeatedly breach locked homes, commit savage axe murders, and vanish into the sultry Louisiana night without leaving a single conclusive clue? The terror began with Joseph and Catherine Maggio, hard-working Italian-American immigrants who operated a small grocery on the corner of Upper Line and Magnolia Streets. Like many in their community, they lived in the attached quarters behind their storefront, dedicating their lives to building a modest business in a bustling neighborhood. Their quiet existence was shattered while they slept, their sanctuary violated by an assailant who moved with terrifying silence and lethal purpose. The Maggios represented the quintessential American dream, a dream that was abruptly and violently extinguished in the dead of night. When brothers of Joseph Maggio discovered the couple, the grim reality of the attack defied immediate comprehension. The perpetrator had not brought a weapon to the scene, but had instead utilized the victim's own axe, abandoning it later in the bloody room. Entry had been gained through a painstakingly specific method, where a lower panel of the wooden back door had been chiseled out, creating a gap just large enough for a person to squeeze through. This methodical breach demonstrated a chilling level of premeditation and a distinct modus operandi, a specific pattern of operation utilized by a criminal that would soon become the terrifying signature of the killer. According to the official police reports of the era, the initial investigation led by local detectives was fraught with confusion and misdirection. Law enforcement initially suspected a vendetta or a localized dispute, perhaps tied to the Black Hand, an early extortion network operating within some Italian immigrant communities. Detectives scoured the neighborhood, interviewing residents and searching for anyone who might bear a grudge against the grocers. However, the sheer randomness of the violence and the complete absence of stolen cash or goods quickly dismantled the theory of a standard robbery or a targeted mafia hit. The physical evidence left behind at the Maggio residence was maddeningly sparse. Aside from the bloody weapon and the discarded chisel, investigators found a message written in chalk on the pavement near the home, though its connection to the crime remains a subject of historical debate. Forensic entomology, the study of insects in criminal investigations to determine the time of death, was virtually non-existent at the time, and the rudimentary fingerprinting techniques of the era yielded no viable matches. The authorities were hunting a ghost, someone who understood the architecture of the city's working-class homes and exploited their vulnerabilities with lethal efficiency. As weeks passed, the lack of a clear motive paralyzed the investigative efforts of the New Orleans Police Department. Detectives were accustomed to crimes driven by greed, jealousy, or revenge, but the phantom of Magnolia Street seemed motivated by something far more obscure and deeply disturbing. The pressure mounted as the press began to circulate rumors, and the public demanded answers that the authorities simply did not possess. The unsolved question lingered, haunting the community and casting a long, dark shadow over the vibrant streets of the city. The illusion of safety was shattered again on June 27, 1918, when the attacker struck the home of Louis Bessemer and Harriet Lowe. The familiar, terrifying hallmarks were present, including a chiseled door panel, an unforced entry, and an assault committed with the victim's own heavy tools. Both victims were found gravely injured, their lives hanging in the balance, further confirming that a serial killer was actively stalking the city. The sheer brutality of the attack, mirroring the Maggio murders with chilling precision, confirmed the worst fears of the investigators and the public alike. A profound wave of panic swept through New Orleans, fundamentally altering the daily lives of its residents. The Italian-American community, having been the primary demographic targeted thus far, felt a profound sense of vulnerability and isolation. Families began to barricade their doors, sleep with loaded firearms, and form neighborhood watch groups to patrol the darkened streets. The vibrant, bustling energy of the city's neighborhoods was replaced by a stifling atmosphere of suspicion and dread, where every shadow held the potential for lethal violence. Harriet Lowe, despite her severe injuries, provided a fragmented and contradictory account of the attack before ultimately succumbing to her wounds. At one point, she accused her partner, Louis Bessumer, of the crime, a claim that led to his temporary arrest and intense public scrutiny. However, investigators soon realized that Lowe's testimony, clouded by trauma and medical interventions, was unreliable, and the physical evidence heavily pointed back to the elusive phantom who was continuing to terrorize the city. The false lead only served to waste precious time and resources, allowing the true perpetrator to remain hidden in plain sight. The violence escalated dramatically in the subsequent months, expanding beyond the initial demographic of Italian grocers. On August 5, 1918, Mary Schneider, a young pregnant woman, was attacked in her home, surviving the ordeal but suffering severe trauma. Then, on March 10, 1919, the killer struck the residence of Charles and Mary Cortimiglia, resulting in the tragic death of their infant daughter, Mary, and leaving the parents critically injured. The sheer ruthlessness of targeting a family with an infant sent shockwaves through the entire region, demonstrating a complete absence of basic human empathy. The Cortimiglia crime scene was a chaotic tableau of violence that deeply unsettled even the most seasoned detectives. Once again, the trademark chiseled door panel provided the point of entry, and the heavy, bloody tool was abandoned nearby. The relentless consistency of the attacks suggested a highly organized and deeply disturbed mind, someone driven by an internal compulsion rather than external provocations. The spatial arrangement of the home indicated that the attacker moved with a terrifying familiarity, navigating the darkened rooms without hesitation. The aftermath of the Cortimiglia attack resulted in another tragic miscarriage of justice, driven by fear and desperation. Mary Cortimiglia, recovering from severe head trauma, accused her neighbors, Orlando and Frank Giordano, of the murders. Despite a complete lack of physical evidence linking them to the crime, the deeply ingrained public panic and the pressure for an arrest led to their swift conviction. It was only later, when Mary recanted her testimony and admitted she had been confused and pressured, that the Giordanos were exonerated, highlighting the destructive collateral damage of the killer's reign. Law enforcement found themselves trapped in a labyrinth of false leads, unreliable testimonies, and mounting public hysteria. The standard investigative playbook was entirely ineffective against a predator who left no fingerprints, stole no valuables, and seemingly chose victims at random. The police increased patrols and offered substantial rewards, but these traditional deterrents failed to slow the pace of the attacks. The sheer scale of the terror outmatched the resources and forensic capabilities of the era, leaving the city in a state of perpetual vulnerability. The narrative of the case took a bizarre and unprecedented turn on March 13, 1919, when a letter was published in local newspapers, purportedly written by the killer. Addressed to the esteemed mortal citizens of New Orleans, the author claimed to be a demon from the hottest hell, mocking the police and reveling in the terror he had inflicted. This communication marked a significant shift, transforming the unknown assailant from a silent predator into a vocal antagonist engaging directly with the public. The authenticity of the letter has been debated by historians, but its impact on the city was immediate and undeniable. The most chilling aspect of the correspondence was a specific, terrifying ultimatum delivered to the residents of the city. The author, dubbing himself the Axeman of New Orleans, declared that he would pass over the city on the upcoming Tuesday night, March 19th. He promised to spare any home where a jazz band was in full swing, effectively holding the entire population hostage with the threat of extreme violence. This unprecedented demand blended the city's rich musical heritage with the grim reality of a serial killer, creating a psychological dynamic unlike anything seen in the annals of American crime. As reported by the Times-Picayune and other local publications, the city's response to the jazz letter was a surreal and desperate display of compliance. On the designated Tuesday night, New Orleans transformed into a chaotic symphony of sound, with every available musician hired to play in homes, clubs, and on the streets. Dance halls were filled to capacity, and those who could not afford a live band played phonographs at maximum volume, filling the humid night air with the frantic rhythms of jazz. It was a collective effort to ward off a monster with music, a testament to the profound psychological grip the killer held over the populace. The night passed without a single attack, leaving the city to wonder if the music had truly appeased the killer or if the letter had been a cruel hoax. This bizarre episode highlights the unique cultural intersection of New Orleans, where the burgeoning jazz scene became inextricably linked to a narrative of survival and fear. The psychological warfare waged by the author of the letter, whether the actual killer or an opportunistic prankster, demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of mass hysteria and media manipulation. The event cemented the legend of the jazz-loving serial killer into the historical fabric of the city. The respite, however, was temporary, as the violence resumed with a grim predictability in the subsequent months. Steve Boca, a grocer, was attacked in August, followed by Sarah Lauman in September, both surviving severe blows to the head after the familiar chiseled entry. The final recorded attack occurred on October 27, 1919, claiming the life of Mike Pepitone, another Italian-American grocer, leaving his wife to discover the horrific aftermath. The sheer persistence of these attacks, continuing even after the massive public spectacle of the jazz night, underscored the relentless and deeply disturbed nature of the perpetrator. Following the murder of Mike Pepitone, the attacks abruptly and inexplicably ceased, leaving the New Orleans Police Department with a suddenly cold trail. The sudden disappearance of the killer is as baffling as the crimes themselves, raising questions about whether the perpetrator died, was incarcerated for another crime, or simply relocated. The lack of closure deeply frustrated investigators who had dedicated immense resources to capturing the phantom, only to have him vanish into the historical ether. The abrupt end to the terror provided relief, but it denied the victims and the city the justice they so desperately sought. Over the decades, numerous theories have emerged attempting to identify the elusive Axeman. One prominent hypothesis, popularized by true crime writers in the mid-20th century, pointed to a man named Joseph Mumfre, who was allegedly shot and killed in Los Angeles by the widow of Mike Pepitone. This theory suggested that Mumfre's periods of incarceration perfectly aligned with the gaps between the attacks, providing a neat cinematic resolution to the enduring mystery. The narrative offered a sense of vigilante justice, a comforting conclusion to a deeply unsettling series of events. However, rigorous historical research has thoroughly debunked the Joseph Mumfre theory. Researchers analyzing police records, court documents, and historical archives from both New Orleans and Los Angeles have found absolutely no evidence of a Joseph Mumfre matching this description, nor any record of Mike Pepitone's widow being arrested for murder in California. The Mumfre narrative appears to be a fabrication, a modern myth constructed to fill the void left by the absence of a true resolution. This highlights the dangers of historical revisionism and the enduring human desire to impose order and closure on chaotic, unresolved events. The true identity of the perpetrator remains one of the most compelling mysteries in American criminal history. Was the Axeman a single, deeply disturbed individual, or could the later attacks have been the work of opportunistic copycats utilizing the widely reported modus operandi? The psychological profile of the killer presents a paradox, revealing someone organized enough to methodically breach homes and evade capture, yet driven by a disorganized, frenzied compulsion to commit extreme violence. The lack of definitive answers continues to invite analysis from modern criminal profilers and historical researchers alike. The motivations behind the specific targeting of Italian-American grocers also remain a subject of intense speculation. While robbery was definitively ruled out, some historians suggest the attacks may have been rooted in deep-seated ethnic prejudice or related to the complex social dynamics of early 20th century New Orleans. Others argue that the grocers were simply targets of opportunity, their attached living quarters providing the specific architectural vulnerabilities the killer preferred. The truth, obscured by over a century of time, remains locked in the mind of a phantom. Today, as modern forensic psychology examines the historical echoes of this period, the legacy of the Axeman of New Orleans exists as a chilling intersection of historical fact and local folklore. The case is frequently cited in studies of early serial killers, demonstrating how public panic, media sensationalism, and a lack of modern forensic science can complicate a criminal investigation. The bizarre decree of the Jazz Letter has immortalized the case, transforming a horrific series of murders into a uniquely New Orleans narrative, where music and mortality briefly danced in the shadows. The historical echoes of this period continue to resonate, a grim reminder of the vulnerabilities inherent in any society. The cold case of the Axeman remains officially open, a testament to the limitations of early law enforcement and the enduring nature of historical mysteries. The victims, ordinary citizens whose lives were violently interrupted, deserve to be remembered beyond the sensationalism of the bizarre Jazz Letter. As we analyze the faded police reports and the chilling testimonies of the survivors, the ultimate question endures through the decades. Who was the phantom that stalked the humid nights of 1918, and what dark compulsion drove him to terrorize an entire city before vanishing without a trace?